All right. So fortunately, I think this is the last talk today. I think it's my last talk today too. So we're going to talk about YAML. So this is about half and half talking about YAML, the other half talking about remap.config. There were some bugs in remap.config dealing with ACL stuff, and we got a request from upstream at Verizon Media about fixing that. And because traffic server rapidly devolved into a rat hole of colossal proportions, because that's just how we roll. So this is some of the stuff that I've learned from working on this. Why is it not? Okay, let's talk about some general YAML notes. So we talk about this every time we talk about YAML. Schemas, do schemas. They're very important. They're great. They're wonderful. This is something apparently, talking to some people isn't obvious, that there's a number of online validators that not only validate your... No. Yes. So yeah, really, yes, they are painful. I'm not going to deny that, but it's worth the effort because it really forces you to think about what does my config look like, right? So yeah, you can go online. You can have these websites that say, well, here's my schema and here's some input. Does it validate? So. So some things that I've watched other people working on schemas to do this. I mean, I'm not going to provide detailed documentation on JSON schema because there's plenty of web resources out there. There's a whole website run by the org. So enum you can use if you have a set of values, but don't do it for numerics. If you have numeric values, use min and max values on it. When you have a sequence, you can say I need to list this many items or at most that many items. Those are both optional. When you have objects, you can later on list and say these properties are required, so the object isn't valid unless it has those properties. And this is a big one here. This would actually caught me by surprise. But if you use the $ref says the definition isn't here, it's somewhere else. So this lets you reuse definitions. So in JSON terms, everything's a schema. They don't have types. They just have schemas. So ref lets you use another schema and use it multiple times. But to simplify things, and it's clear to me why they did this, if you use a ref, then no other local properties have any validity. It says everything about this is this other place. That avoids issues. The ref always takes precedence. And use description. You'll thank yourself later on when you're looking through your schema and saying, what the heck did I mean this to do? All right. Yeah, I said that. JSON uses schema the way C++ uses class. You can nest these up. And this is apparently a surprise to some people. YAML is really JSON with better syntax. That's it. There are no data structures in YAML that are not also in JSON. The JSON syntax is accepted by any YAML parser. This is one of the reasons you don't see YAML schemas, as far as I can tell, because no one sees the point, right? You can just write it in JSON, or if you're a pure YAML, we could write our schemas in YAML if we wanted, right? Because we're going to use YAML-CPP to do this. The reason you probably don't want to do that is if you want to integrate with the other tools, then they're not going to do that. So, although theoretically we could write them in YAML and convert to, it's trivial to write a converter to take YAML and output JSON, so we could do that. Now this is an issue that's come up that we want to be careful of because we're already breaking this, is what we'd like to be able to say is that conceptually we could take all the config files for everything in Traffic Server and put them in one file. Now we don't think anyone will actually ever do that, but if that's possible, then it means that the admin can divide his files however he likes. Well, yeah, maybe. But the key point is if this is possible, then the division of the files then becomes up to the administrator rather than something we impose on the administrator. And they can set them up in a way that makes sense to them in their local environment. And they can slam them together however they want. Susan, I think, or maybe it was Leif, who got excited about saying, well, then we can just have a directory, right? And you say, okay, just go to that directory, load all the .yaml files up into one big data structure, and off we go. So what this essentially means is that when you have your config, you don't put it at the top level, you put it at least one level down with a distinct key. So we'll see that for the IP allow, it's like IP allow or IP IP ACLs or something. And that's really all that means. That's really all I have to do. So we're using YAML-CPP as our library. Unfortunately, because of the way it's written, you have to do annoying things like this. There's really no good way around it. Learn to live with it. Now, the YAML node is actually a reference pointer implementation, so there's not a lot of difference between passing them by reference and passing them by value. Effectively, it's a smart pointer. So it's a little cheaper to pass by reference, but it's really trivial in the scheme of things, so I wouldn't worry about it a whole lot. And also always try to check for types. They have the is object, is sequence, to make sure those are right. Let's see. So you can load the file through YAML. What I tend to do, though, is I use TS file and load it up, and then parse it separately. I think I get better error messages about that. Because then I control, if I can't load the file, I can generate the error message about I couldn't find it, I didn't have permission, blah, blah, blah. One thing I've experimented in a different project, this is actually used in the HTTP replay code. Does anyone besides me know what this means? Oh, you guys are so young. So SAX was a style of parsing, gosh, what were they parsing? XML. Does anyone know what I heard of XML? Yeah, so it's a stream. Yeah, so it's stream oriented, so you don't load the whole thing, you load events and pieces of it at a time, and this is designed to load really large XML files. I'm not sure how useful it's going to be us. I used it in the replay because we were loading files that were well over 100 megabytes at a time. And I don't think we're going to be doing that, but that's entirely possible to do as well. So in generating error messages, now this is a big thing for me. I've made it for my stuff, I put a lot of work into generating error messages that are as helpful as possible to the administrator. So one of the things to remember is that if you have a YAML node, you can get this mark object, and it has information about what line number, what character number, and other things about the nodes. You can say, hey, the node on line 17 is wrong. The node acts as a C++ container, so you can do fun stuff like this to iterate over sequences. Right, oh, this one burned somebody. Rushford told me I had to tell you guys this. So these nodes are all reference pointers and smart pointers, so if you lose the root node, the entire tree disappears too. So if you're passing pieces of that tree to other functions, make sure somebody still has the root node. Let's see. Now this is something, I don't know, not everyone agrees with this. I like to say that if I'm writing the config, that these are the same thing, right? This takes some extra work inside the YAML though. But I like it as a convenience to say, well, if it's supposed to be a list and I see a singleton, I'll pretend it was a list of size 1 and just effectively put the brackets around. And if you'll see code like that in a lot of the stuff we'll look at later, and that's what it's doing. That's absolutely not required though. Yes, you have to put that in the schema too. Well, I'll show you schema and code later on how that works. But yes, you have to put in the schema that it can be a singleton or a list. And then in the code, you have to say, is it a singleton, is it a list? And it's not as important as you think, because what happens is, in real life, you're going to have something like this for the list, right? This loop here. And I generally just make it call a method. So if it's a singleton, I just say, well, just call the method. Other if it's a sequence, loop and call the method. So let's see. Yeah, so it's unfortunate because of a lot of these things. You end up with a lot of repetitive code. I am still working on the canned YAML stuff. So that's one of my other projects. And so canned YAML is designed to take a schema and generate C++ code that validates the schema for you. So it's not going to do all the parsing, but it makes the actual working with it much simpler because you don't error check anymore. You say, okay, it passes schema. I know that if this is a sequence or this is this other thing, or it has these keys. You can just assume that and not do all the if checks and all of that and all the error messages generated separately. So that's probably late this year. I expect to have this working. Anyone who wants to experiment with YAML and do fun stuff is welcome to jump in on that project too. Yeah, I can see the enthusiasm in your eyes. All right. Right, okay, so this is a fun one. We argued about this at the last summit, and I'm just going to impose my opinion on people because I think I can get away with it. So YAML as a language supports providing type names for nodes. You can say this node is of type something. YAML-CPP has support for this. I didn't think it did, but I found out yes, in fact, it's there. So you can say things like this. So what this says is I've got a key named match, and the value is this string here, a space expression, and the type is regex. Right? And you say, why do you have a bang there? Well, because that's the YAML syntax for specifying a type. That's just the way it works. So where this comes up is where we want to do things like we want to have different interpretations of strings depending on the type, whether it's a regex. This came up in the TLS stuff too, when you say, well, this is a glob, is this a regex, is this just a literal string? There's various approaches. I really didn't like this approach where you say, well, I've got match, but I can also have the key match regex, and that means you match a regex. So my designs, I've gone with the typing there to say what type that is and how to interpret it. When you're doing lookups on objects or maps, it takes a constref standard string. So if you pass in a literal, it'll construct the standard string. So if you're doing constants, do not declare them as string views or text views. Declare them as strings. And I don't use the as string at all because that constructs a string and returns it by value. But scalar returns a reference to the string in the node. Gosh, I would really love to take a couple months off and do a PR on YAML-CPP to convert it to string view, because when they wrote it for C++ 11t, and obviously that has no string view, so they did the best they could with what was in C++ at the time, but we could do much better now. All right. So any other YAML questions? Because who, what, where? Mean for your... You can ask them. All I can tell you is this is how it's implemented. Yeah, well, I mean, now what you do is you use a string view. Because then if it's a const char star, it converts trivially. If it's a standard string, it converts trivially. It's a fast and efficient and more general. So any other YAML questions? The odds are you guys are probably going to eventually have to do some YAML coding. So let's see. So let's talk about remap. So I have a schema for this. If you want to go look at the schema, there it is. I used my root key as URL rewrite. If you guys have comments on the names, that's fine. Honestly, I really don't care that much. They're just, standard string constants declared in the code. They're pretty trivial to change. So it looks something like this. You say URL rewrite. You can have your filters with your names. Each of these is a filter, and then you have your rules with your target URL, replacement URL. So fundamentally, the file looks like this. All right. So here's a diagram of the schema. And you can see you have URL rewrite down here, which can have one set of rules. That turns into a directive group, which comes up here, and that can eventually become a rule here with plugins. So this is the structure of the schema. And you can see from Miles's thing, so this filtered group list and define is how it does the singleton or list thing. So I say, well, it's a group, and this group is either a list or it's a singleton. And if it's a list, well, it's a list of singletons. I'd love to find something that does this conversion automatically. That would be a great intern project. Because you should be able to read the schema and generate that. So here's an actual example of an actual rule set. So we have the root key, we have this filter. We say here are the rules. So here's a rule that says if the target, so if you match this, replace it with that. I'm not sure about these names. This is what's used in the documentation. So if you go read the documentation on rewrite, it'll talk about target and replacement URLs. I don't know. That's a good question.
That's a lot of curly braces.
Oh, I like the curly braces. I mean, the YAML-CPP, it doesn't care. If you want to put it in that format, it'll parse just the same. Okay, a filter is an ACL control. This all of this is based on existing functions and properties in remap. And this all started because of Miles, issue 1971, where he complained that the filters didn't work the way he expected. So in a current remap, you can define filters, you can use filters, you can enable filters. All of that is in the current remap config. That's what the documentation says.
So like there's ways you can say, like what's done here is you can name these things and you can call it
Right, so I want to be clear that none of this requires changes to the actual remap config execution or data structures. This is only about config. So all the data structures here already exist, except some pretty minor tweaks in how the filters are evaluated to get that stuff right. But fundamentally, we're just changing the config. Everything you see here, as far as I can tell, is an existing function that exists in the current remap processor. All right, let's walk through this. Excellent. Right, so what we say is if you're we're going to have a filters, and we have one that's named Bob. And what it says is it's a filter on, oh, it doesn't have an action there. You're right, that's bad. There should be an action here. Let's assume the action is allow. And it matches if the source address, that is the remote inbound address, the client address, is in this network. And then we have some rules, right? So if we have this first rule, it says, well, if the target URL is this, replace it with that. Great, there you go. And this one, we can nest, we can have a list of rules inside the list of rules. All right? And so, so here's a rule, here's a rule. Now what this means is that at the front of this list, we say enable Bob. And that says, oh, that enable, that's a list filter enable. So I will go look, oh, there's Bob. Let's enable Bob. So Bob applies to both of these rules.
This is like because
Yes.
You can also do actuals on IPs without making a filter.
Yes. You can do that in here too.
But I'm just saying, because that's what the filters is not necessarily something you have to do actuals.
Correct. But they are supported in the current stuff. Right, so this is equivalent of saying dash enable, dash filter enable Bob, rule, dash disable filter Bob. It maps directly into that remap. And the brackets are, the sublist is simply to make it easier to enable things and then remember to disable them later. It's just standard scoping. We can change that if you want, but.
Because it's like, to me, this is Bob is down like simply the targets. And the reality, what you're trying to say is the two-dot example is kind of a child in my mind. The way I see this is 2 examples, 3 examples, children.
Well, what happens if you want to enable multiple filters? Now, the syntax actually says that you could, in fact, say enable and then put a list here and say filter, 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 filter.
We had this discussion before tonight. I would much rather have it such that you have a filter column list of filters for each remap for each rule.
You can do that?
I know you can, but can they get rid of this whole notion of on and off that we have? The on and off stuff is just scary shit because if it's on in the beginning of the file, you're either editing stuff and then you're adding something, you're not going to see that you're actually enabling a bunch of filters like 2000 lines.
Right, but that's one of the reasons I put this in. It's because then it separates out and makes it very clear. Okay, this is a nested list. All right, there's the filters we're enabling.
Yeah, but this only works because it's only 2 examples. Imagine now you have 25,000 lines here.
Okay.
And you add it into the line 25,001, you have to scroll up 25,000 times to see which filters are being enabled.
All right, so, but then,
I also think you also notice, you might notice the indentation that's there, but that's maybe.
but you really like that better than saying, well, I have 25,000 rules and I have a filters on each one. I'm going to have to look through all the 25,000 to see if they're actually all the same.
Explicit over magic.
You would prefer that? Oh.
Because no matter where I open
So if I make one typo in any of those filter definitions,
Realistically, I think the other way to understand that question is, has anybody had any experience with filters?
probably not.
Right. I think that's probably your answer. Like you'll ask, again, you'll ask me, like I'll say, anybody, I don't think Yahoo uses these things.
No.
You don't use this thing. I'm sure that Comcast and traffic control doesn't have. I would bet these being filtered are like doing a lot of gymnastics to try to support it. It's something that's not been used by most of the users.
And the nice thing here is that you can maybe we have to add more things. You can have a really complicated filter that gets really.
Well, okay, well, here, let's move on, hold it. Hold this thought, let's move on, I'll show you some other stuff, and then we can come, because there's other stuff that relates to this that we can get back to. All right, so blah, 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 we'll skip that because you guys don't like any of that. Right, so here is, there should be, oh, there we go. This is what a URL rewrite rule looks like. This is the full definition, not just example. So we've got the target, we've got replacement, we've got a list of plugins, we've got options. So currently the only option we have is reverse, which will automatically populate the reverse remap rules. So this doesn't support reverse map directly. If you want reverse map, you put the option on your main rule and it does them for you. The other way seemed extremely error prone. Or we can just get rid of that too.
More than one map rule to the same origin, you can't have the correct reverse map because it can only be one, whereas here you can actually associate it with the form.
Yeah, so you just say,
This solves a real problem.
That's,
oh,
you're saying, yay.
all right. I just didn't expect that out of Leish. Then we have the proxy port. This is effectively the with receive port. So with receive port rules disappear. If you want a with receive port rule, you define a normal rule and you put a proxy port in it. Because as far as I can tell, that's the only difference. Well, oh, I don't have that on here. Refer, right? Okay, so there's a bug. There's a refer property here too that's not on there. So again, refer rules go away. If you want a rule that's equivalent of a current referral rule, you define a normal rule, you put a refer value on it and says, here's the referrer data. Redirect works the same way. It has a value, this is a status code that says, if this rule gets hit, I'm not going to do a remap, I'm going to do a redirect with this status code. And again, that replaces the redirect rules too. I mean, I ended up with just the standard rule and everything else is just an option on top of that. But now we're going to get back to the thing we put on hold, which is inside this rule, we have a filters tag you can put on there. Oh. Yeah, it's got to be lower. There's the regex stuff. So in our case, this would be target. You'd have target here, you'd have the URL regular expression here, and you'd say, it's a regex. Yes, it's the target URL as described in the documentation. What? But that's not, yeah, that's not how we do it, though.
This is where it gets really weird, but you have to be careful because the regex map works with regular maps and different priorities.
Yes.
That's intentional because if you have 25,000 rules, but half of them being regex and other one being, you don't evaluate 12,500 regexes if it's one of those host-based maps.
Right.
So it's not going to still work there?
It'll work exactly the same way the current stuff does. If you,
You're building up the same tables.
yes. Again, we're only changing the config. The actual output, the actual data structures that get generated are as identical. Effectively, I haven't changed those data structures.
So let me not fix the issue with the reader.
Fix the issue with the redirects.
Redirects don't work. The redirect works.
Oh, I guess I can look at that, but
Someone feels like it could be moved into the same container as the register.
all right.
Since whichever map comes first, right? If it's a map or a redirect, there's whichever the match that it hits will be that one.
Yeah.
Because today, if a map and the rule matches, then you can never match a redirect.
Oh, okay.
If a map's not,
All right. Yeah, that's outside the scope of this stuff.
it would be nice to fix that.
All right. So if you want to get rid of the enable disable, then we can still leave this in and say, well, you can name your filters, and then inside the rule, you can say filter and put the names in. So Jason convinced me that we shouldn't really differentiate. This was originally just filters. But what you can do is, and for each element, this is a list. Each element of the list can either be a name, a string, in which case I'm assuming there's some filter you defined, or it's a filter definition itself, in which case it becomes an anonymous one that's attached to the rule. Yes?
Let's pick up down the YAML wrap what we talked about before, with those anchor links to the rule.
Yes.
So instead of having filter definitions, you essentially use the all include. So you define something somewhere in YAML, right?
Well, you could do that with this.
Yeah, but without explicitly calling filters, just so it's, see what I'm saying?
Yes, but you can do that. I mean, so what you do is, instead of, if you can have an explicit filter definition here, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah, what I'm saying is, instead of-
yes, no, I understand. You could have an explicit filter definition there. So, but what YAML syntax and the anchor and reference does is that you could put in the YAML level the filter definition up above and then put the reference there. And as far as the parser was concerned, it would be as if you typed the definition in that spot.
Then we get rid of the whole notion of filters, essentially.
Well, what do you put there if you don't have filters?
We don't have filters in the ATS structure, like just like you said. Instead, what happens is it expands up into those groups, those anchors, right? But you can do it manually anyways without having filters.
I suppose.
See what I'm saying? You don't make these filters, instead you just do that, you don't duplicate the rules. It looks like it's defined once, but essentially it's just included and copied into never really. And then we don't have a notion of filters at all. And at one time, it gets rid of the whole notion and you just use whatever anchor there is for that rule, it's the one that takes it.
I'd have to think about that.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I'm not sure that would be more convenient, but
Let's go. So now we move on to the concept of these macro filters into YAML.
does that actually help the code?
I haven't looked at the physical, I'm sure there's a bunch of
Well, this is the... It doesn't help. I'll still have to translate. Oh, no, actually. No, we can't do that. Because you'll have huge memory problems. Yes, for every single instance that it shows up, I will make a copy because I cannot know it's the same as the previous one. So if I have 25,000 rules, I'll have 25,000 copies of that filter instead of one.
How much is that? Like 2 bytes? I mean, it's good to like having an IP and a method and then an item. But there's not a few bytes here, right?
100, 200 bytes.
Okay, so still, so 200, even if it was 100 bytes times a million, that's 100 megabytes, but that's a lot of rules, right? You can still you can do, plan.
Yes, but then you've thrown away the argument that this is simpler in the code. Well, it's not having that many. From someone's point of view, it could be, I have one, I just want to put it on every rule. But then but no, it's not going to look quite the same. What I'm saying is that when you generate the actual URL data structures, if you use the name, then there'll be one filter data structure in the remap. If you use the anchor reference, there'll be 25,000 copies of that.
Yeah, but it has some, like each remap rule has a pointer to its, the actual specific rule.
Right, but if I'm... No, what I'm saying is if from my point of view is writing this as an administrator, I just say, I just have one ACL rule, I'm going to use it 20,000 times. So now, but the internals will duplicate that 20,000 times. All right. Right, because it's not going to know. As far as the YAML stuff is concerned, is if they type these every single time. And so there'll be copies. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they really feel like the filter theme and all that stuff is, I don't think anybody uses it, so it's like,
that's kind of what I'm getting at. If no one uses, get rid of a bunch of code, and with all all these features that no one uses, they still have the option of these anchored references.
All right.
The behavior will be the same, and we don't have to deal with it.
I guess, like, if you look at, go back to the plus club PR, we do that. We just don't call it like for almost every single config, we have a deny, posts and purges and deletes and stuff like that. Which is like, so from administrator point, we just almost always put that in our config.
And you just duplicate it? All right.
So that way, when you actually look at that property is the big file, because each property is the big file, it's all self-contained. You see exactly what's going to happen in that 120 lines of
Yeah.
Bobby and Alvin have no idea that if you tell them that you're denying version or post.
Yeah, but that's all generated stuff. I mean, I'm thinking of what, all I can say is if I were an administrator, I would despise that, but it just seems unnecessarily painful, but whatever. So the plugin object is much simpler. You give it a path to the dynamic library, and you give it a list of strings. The strings just pass the argument exactly the same way we do it now. Yeah, it'll be ordered the same way it is now. I don't understand. I mean, in the current one, you say, at plugin, and it runs that order. Well, here you have a list, and it'll just call them one by one down the list. Yeah, for remap, yes. The order is... Right, they're actually a list. And each list has these two elements in it. Each element in the list has these two things in it. And yes, I was going to, because of the way the data structures are, I was just going to populate the plugin list.
Do you have an example of what this looks like?
No. Well, we don't need that. Don't need that. Wow. Now I don't have anything left to talk about.
It's still useful, it's just not...
No, Leif said we're getting rid of the name filters entirely. Oh, this. Oh, you want to talk about the other thing?
Filter is still a thing, it's not, we're just kind of saying, you need to like say map starts here, filter X top starts here and ends here. You just say.
Well, I mean, the whole ordering thing goes away. If the only filters that apply are actually in the rule, then there's an obvious order that they're applied in, right? So all the questions about ordering just disappear.
It says filters here, also the define macros of all filters.
Yeah, but
We see filters as method equals there and method.
but those are the same thing.
I understand that. I'm just saying that's where most of the filters are confused.
I said I'm not going to argue about names. If you guys want a different name set, let me know. But this is what they're called in the documentation. That's where I got the names from.
This is still valid, right?
Yeah, so this is,
Well, we wouldn't name it.
yeah, you wouldn't name it. Right, so you have an action, which is an enum, which is allow or deny. You have method, which is a standard singleton or list. It's just a list of methods. Source adder, again, is the remote. Inbound address is the address the client is sitting at. The proxy adder is the local inbound address. That is the address to which the client connected. People ask, why do you have that in there? Well, because that's currently a feature that you can put in. If you don't think it's a good feature, that's great. We can take it out, but we support that now. I don't know if anyone uses it. Scoop, what? No, there's nothing. I think the one you want is, where did it go? Okay, so this is one that Miles and I had a discussion about, and I agree, and I just said, screw it, I agree with Miles. Is right here. And I was convinced that the current implementation, the filters have no effect on whether the rule matches. So they are completely ignored in terms of matching. So once you match, then you say, okay, let's go and apply the filters, and then we do, but you're stuck at that rule. Once you've matched that rule, you apply the filters, and there you are. Is that what we're going to do?
No, I mean,
That's how it works today.
I know that's not working, it's not great.
It's not awesome, but that's how it works today. But that can get very complex.
Well, what I think we should do, if we're going to go full retard here, and we change the notion entirely, we say, in the YAML you say, for host apple.com, here's a bunch of rules, and for the path, /foo, here's a bunch of rules in the path. So we order to this, you hash on the whole thing, and then you go through the path names, and then we find the rules and matches, and then we can do things such as if the actor doesn't allow method is, then it goes to the next one, right? This is that's how nginx configs work.
Yeah, see, that's where originally I thought they affected matching, because it seemed really nice to say, well, you're not allowed, the deny was you're not allowed to use this rule.
And if you do this, like I just said, then this solves the redirect problem too. You map to the host, right? And then you say for slash, it should be this. For /foo, it should be a redirect. But for slash, it should be mapped to this.
The killer is going to be designing the data structures that implement this efficiently.
Most of the stuff that we have is identical. Within the host group there now, right?
You could just bring a new remap role.
Well, kind of, yeah. Then we use that whatever, what do we use for finding a feature or something?
The tree, try.
Yes, and then we do the try within the host group, right?
Well, we already have the tries for all the literal.
Right. You just do a new try for each one of those.
Yeah, but then you're doing, one of the reasons that the literals are so fast is that there's one try for all of the literal rules.
Well, but you still now you're saying first you look for the host, and then you find one set of rules that applies to the host only. And within the host, there is one try.
Yeah, it's kind of sort of. I'll have to show here. Let's see if I can find this here.
The try would be a lot smaller than the try that we have
Okay.
today.
So this is the current remap data structures. Nice and simple and straightforward.
Right. So, I'm just saying, right, I mean, it would be nice to solve some of these fundamental problems that we have to post the way that we have
All right, let me be blunt. I can't do this. I don't use remap. I don't understand what the desired properties are. And clearly, my designs are not matching what people's expectations are. No, I didn't. I put filters in and named filters. Right, so I said, here's the data structures. Well, what I'm saying is I'm not the person to do that. You're going to have to find some, I mean, yeah. Well, again, the problem is I've never used remap. It's just not something I do. I don't have any feel for what's good or what's bad. And the things I like apparently are not what people who actually use this stuff like. I love named filters. I thought that was awesome. I noticed whose name wasn't on that.
And then come up with a design, and then somebody can make a list for approval or
So,
this stuff is really complicated, and we use the current document. This is great for not the current document.
and I want to put another pitch in for Plant UML. This is just Plant UML. We talked about that. It makes it easy to generate these things. And actually, this is how I came to understood it, is every time I'd look at a structure, I'd go and text edit my Plant UML. And because I was using the real editor, which Visual Code is almost as good as, it would update in real time. So I just put the extra structure in, it would show up. It was actually very helpful in understanding the code to write the diagram. So I would encourage people to do that kind of thing. Anyway.
Another way to say that is once you convert from remap to YAML, it's going to be hard to get. It's like when we go to 10, it's going to be hard to change that. Whereas in this one, you could make some. Okay, we had it this way for 20 years.
All right. Well, we're going to have someone step up to spearhead that redesign. You guys come out Champagne anytime. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Where were we? All right. Yeah. So there's a schema, but we're going to change all of that around. So anyway, actually, let's look at this a little bit. Let's see if I actually can make it so you can see it. Okay. So. We're obviously going to now change this around, but this is what an actual real schema of a non-trivial project looks like. Here we say the base. The base object is the base type is an object. It can have a version property, which we should always put in. Then it has a URL rewrite key, and it's a type of object. And it has two properties, rules and filters, and each of those is this other thing here. So this is when I was talking about the ref stuff. So this says the definition for this is somewhere else. It's in definitions, URL rewrite, filter define group. And I put this extra level here so that I didn't collide with other people's definitions. So down here we see, wow, there's definitions. Definitions, URL rewrite, and then we have a bunch of stuff. So we have, so here's an IP range. All right. Let's look at IP range and action. Those are probably good enough for without getting too deep. So we say we have an IP range. That's the name of it. It's any of these subschemas inside the brackets, right? So you see with a bracket, we have a list of two schemas here. So it's valid if it's either of these schemas. This schema says it's an array that's exactly too long because we've set the min and the max. The elements of the array are of type string, and each one is supposed to be an IP address. Or it can just be a string, and then I parse it as in the standard IP range parse. So it can be an IP address, a dash separated pair, or a CIDR notation. So this one, it's a range. So if you have address dash address. So 10.0.0.0 dash dash 10.255.255.255. Yeah, sitter notation is a slash network. So 10.
What's the second thing in this implementation? So you just go 1.2.3/0/24.
Yes.
2.2.3.
No. So it's a. Oh, that's a different type, right? There's this type from here to here, and that's the list. Or it's a string. And that's what the any of means. Down here, action is an enum. We say it's a type string. It's an enum, so the value has to be either this or that. Oh, so that there's a URL rewrite there because, again, this is a composability issue. So up here, I say the rule type, the type for rules is definitions URL rewrite, right? So that's where that comes in. So if we compose this and someone else has other definitions, I don't step on their definitions. Yeah, so this means that it can be put together with other schemas easily too and not interfere with them. The only thing is the version, and we could just special case that, but otherwise I've tried to make it so it's independent here. And that definitions path is purely arbitrary. Definitions is convention, but as you can see, you have to put the path in anyway, so it can be anything you like. Right, so method list. Right, this is a normal list. It's an array. We always have to have at least one item in it, and each item is one of these things. And that thing you can see up above is we just say it's a string. We can't enum that because we have to allow arbitrary other methods, right? So that can't actually be an enum. Okay, yes, there's a subtle distinction there. Any of means that if any of those schemas match, it's valid. One of means exactly one of the schemas have to match. So it's subtle, but it can matter sometimes. Yes. Yeah, but for instance, if you use one of and you have two things that are just strings, it will fail because whatever you type in will match two of the schemas in there. Filter define list, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so there's a lot of, so here's a required, so here's the plugin. So we say, okay, it's a plugin, it's an object, it has a property path, it has a property args. The args is in fact, so here I didn't bother pulling this out. There's an art form whether you're pulling it out just like classes in C++. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not. Because you don't have to do the refs, you could just nest all of this directly. It's an array, it has items, it doesn't have any min items, so you can actually have an empty list. But you have to have, if you have the plugins, you have to have the path property. You can skip the args, you don't have to have that. The plugin list, though, has to have at least one element in it. So, is there anything else in here? So this one, the refer data, you have to have the redirect and the match on that, blah, blah, blah. Options, you can have reverse. We added other things, we put that in there. All right, I think that's about all the interesting stuff. Where did we go? Let's see. Filter scoping, that's gone. Right, so regularly we end up with one type of rule. If it's a reg expression one, you mark the match with regex. If it's a receive port, you set the proxy port as refer, you set the refer value. If it's a redirect, you set the redirect value. Reverse rules, you set the reverse option. So, all right, open. We talked about this before, that I'm updating the config, not the remap implementation. Open issues. So this is the one we just talked about. Should filters affect matching? So we beat that one to death. All right, now this one came out. I want to talk about this. I sent a survey out. I actually got 3 responses. Thank you. Thank you. I was surprised at the feedback on that. And so this was about how people expected the filters to actually apply. And let me say that everyone got it all wrong. Well, what that means, yes, yet again, my expectations and vision of how this is supposed to work is apparently completely different from everyone else who does remap. So yes, so they all got it all wrong. So the problem is that I'm trying to have a rule to say, a mechanical rule, right? When I'm writing an implementation, say this is how it's supposed to work. So there's these various possible rules. This is the actual rule that was in the PR. So everything ends with an implicit allow everything. This is another variant that we could have done, which I didn't, but this is how IP allow works. So if you have an empty IP allow file, it allows all. If you put rules in, then there's an implicit deny all at the end. And that seems to be okay. This rule seems a little weird, but this is the rule, as far as I can tell, that all three people who responded were following. So what they seem to expect is that if I have action, 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 whatever that last action was, everything else gets the opposite of it. So if I say allow this, then they expect there to be a deny. But if I say deny this, then they expect it to be an allow after that. And if they say, allow deny, then they seem to expect everything that wasn't denied in that last one to be allowed. Does that make any sense? That's, as best I could tell, that's the expectation you seem to have. Right, so, what? What is the right thing, right? We can define any arbitrary rule and it's correct because the implementation is correct and implements it. I'm trying to find something that minimizes the number of stupid errors that the administrators do, right? And based on this seems to be the rule of least surprise. And of course, in the case of the single action, it's really obvious, right? People, in the implicit allow model, right? This would deny all gets and allow everything else, but this wouldn't, right? This is completely useless in the default allow because it does nothing. But people, every single person who looked at this expected there to be an implicit deny after that. So it isn't that they expected an implicit deny or an implicit allow. It was context dependent. Oh yes, sorry, typo. You are correct. That should allow post and deny everything else. That seems to be what people expect, how people expect it to behave, and that's what Rule 3 says. It is not Rule 1 or 2. You say what you want, and you say, if I didn't say it, do the. I meant you to do the other thing, right? I said. Yes. So if there was another allow here, so you said action deny method get, action allow post, then in fact what you get, you'd say you'd actually just allow posts because there'd be an implicit deny all. But you tend to do, generally you'd say then allow these addresses. So if you then said allow IP address blah, let's say the 10 net, the expectation would be that if it's a get, deny it. If it's in the 10 address, otherwise if it's in the 10 address, allow it. Otherwise, deny it because the last thing you said was allow. Does that, you think we could think that can be explained to people and not seem bizarre? Yeah, when you fall off, yeah. Last thing, you do the opposite, right? I guess it seems natural to people because when you do these, you're almost always alternating your allows and denies. You're saying allow this, deny that, allow this, deny that, right? You're flipping between the two. Anyway, so I think we're going to go with this one. There doesn't be any serious objection to it. It's the best I could do based on how people seem to think this should work. No. You still have a list of ACLs.
Yeah. Well, so I think what Blake was saying is you imagine the structure saying like, okay, your inbound thing is, go to a.com and then your path is to, and then method equals get, and then you have your rules around for method equals get, and method equals post, and this.
I suppose. Oh, if you did the big thing. I thought he meant the removing the name filters. All right. So, well, I thought this would be the most controversial part.
What if we just don't allow him, I mean, what if we have explicitly, that is, just let us configure it, you explicitly have to.
And with an allow or deny?
I think that there were three things right away when we tried to tell them. I probably answered like that.
Yes.
You see it like that, it's like, that's good like that.
But yes, this is how you answered. All yours in particular followed Rule 3. But you can't require every single rule. You have to define a default rule too. That's not going to fly. Well, you should go back and look over answers if you want. But if I remember, you were Rule 3. I want to get it again. I don't have a feel for this because I don't do it. I wanted to see what people who actually did this seem to think. All right. Okay, and this is one thing. This is a general YAML thing. It's really bad in remap, but it's going to apply everywhere. Is that if we have YAML, then these things are not just strings. They're not just numbers. They are YAML. They are data objects, and so the update is going to be a bit trickier. To say, I want to update this thing, right? You can't just say change it to this string because it may not be a string. Describing is easy. That's actually so. Right, but now maybe it's not an int 0. Maybe it's a data structure, and you have to have all the pieces in order for it to make sense. It's an ACL. I want to set a new ACL in there. You can't just put a piece of it in. You have to put the whole thing in, and so it's not just an atomic value. It's a structured thing. We have to think about how does that go in. How do you actually find the piece of the tree that would map to? Because you may not have that YAML tree anymore. I'm not saying it's insurmountable. I'm saying it's not obvious how we're going to do that, and so someone's going to have to sit down and actually think about it, right? It's not going to just happen. Conversely, though, the description is trivial, right? We can generate the YAML. That's easy. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, on that. Setting's going to be a little more tricky. All right, so that's the end of this. Yeah, John Rushford's looking at that. I still haven't made up my mind about that. I lean more toward the directory style thing where you don't have includes. You just say, there's a directory. You want to be able to include standard definitions. Right. But the directory thing solves that. You say, instead of saying load this file, you say load this directory. You put all your rules in the directory.
And so we have a directory for URL rewrite and a directory for other files.
Well, it would be up to you, right?
I think it's really belongs to that discussion belongs to the line of work for
So
my second question is about other things that are being done related, like hosted.config, Chapter.config, Are we going to merge some of this stuff and talk about that? Or?
that would be, well, we have to put that in Miles's working group. Thanks, Miles. You're the best. Because, right again, I was just trying to, this project keeps growing bigger and bigger, but I was just trying to use the existing data structures. But yes, it would be really much better to put a lot of these options, to eliminate some of those other files and merge them into remap.config. I think in general, I think that's a good idea. I'd have to look at specific cases, but by default, I think we should try to do that, and only not do it if you have a good reason for not doing it. Does that seem reasonable? Because it's just kind of annoying to have to do these host URLs in different places and hope they match, right? Yeah, it gets fun though when you start talking how the submodules interact with each other. So we have this lafe.config, right? Where it replaces the remap.config, right? Oh, actually, I should call it retard.config. or FA. We'll call it FA. And so it's got all this remap info in it, but it's got these other little pieces of cache info in it. Somehow that information has to flow. So there's some parser that's going to parse that and look at the logic, and somehow that data has to flow from there over to the cache. But I guess maybe that's not so bad. Right now, effectively, the parser is independent and simply says, oh, I've got these remap data structures. I'll new these data structures, and I'll call these insert calls. I guess it could just easily say, oh, there's the cache things. I'll grab the cache things, and I'll create cache structures and stuff them in lists.
I mean, the other benefit of, if we do this, right, the full retard, then we kind of baking in the conversion to YAML for cache.config and for parent.config and for hosting.config maybe. One of anyone where there's one of these host name mapping, we move all of those in the full retard movement into this file.
Almost implicit in that is there's no way of getting it done by now.
Just rip it out and throw it on the ground.
Oligag, obviously, and we need to get everyone to get sort of on board on the plan. Whatever we pick for the future, for 9 here, we need to get people on board, right? Stop what you're doing, unless it's an emergency for VJ. But like, stop the other development that you had in plan here. Let's focus on the things we must get done for 9.
Well, maybe what we should talk about tomorrow is trying to get a list of what's really important for 9. That would be a good use of tomorrow, is to sit down. We're not going to get it done today because we're all punch drunk already, and you're all about to get really drunk. But I think tomorrow might be a good time to spend saying, well, what are the key things that we have to have for 9?
Well, we can do that with them, and then following that discussion or sort of whiteboard session, whatever we call it, we need to make this decision between 1 and 2 and 3, and Brian has sort of a 2.5 alternative for where we're going to do with the 9 release.
Well, you want to make that the agenda for tomorrow then?
I think so too.
We're not talking, today I'm fried.
No, I'm spent. I'm beat like a rented mule.
The other thing is I don't know if we might be able to do some of the things like caching. It'd be nice to get it all into the YAML, but it might be still, you kind of put it out.
Then doing these multiple keys again, it would be nice to just keep it on one thing and have all.
It would be
It's okay to use performance gain like that because now, but then you do like the host matching already and whatnot, or like 2 or 3, 4 times for one request.
Well, there's that.
Now it's just once, right? You're done.
That's what happens best. The most expensive thing on our servers is regular expression matching. Right. Because of how many regular expression matches we have. And if we did that once for a domain and then did all the paths, it would be much faster.
And then again, parent, there's also a host selection happening in parent, there's a host selection happening, there's a host selection happening in the hosting of the page.
Right.
There's at least 4 places where you do a host matching.
So BJ noted that the YAML for parent config is PR has been open for, he said 5 months. I think it's more like 7 or 8. So,
Well, I think IP allow's got that beat, though. The PR.
There was an issue with the host.
It was put in August 2018.
yeah, this is, I think it's for earlier, because there was another PR that did that function, right? And I'm saying that like we were taking us a long time to kind of agree on what parenting config could look like, and I think this is going to take remap
Well, that's one of the reasons I wanted to just change the config, because then I can say, no, you can't do this because the data structures don't support it.
Right. I'm convinced that we can do this faster than what happened. There was not a strong driver on the no offense to the data. We did not try this parent change. We met up a couple of times, 3-4 months in between.
Yeah, but that was, unfortunately, those are directed more toward long-term planning in terms of the whole layer 7 routing project more than parent config per se. So we were trying to set up
What do you got on this slide is on 3,000,
by Kit. And I promise we're not going to assign all this stuff to you. Not all of it. You got to be careful with the wording.
But see, the thing is that IT allow would change if we change the structure. If we did the holistic approach, you could do IT allow within.
Could you? It operates well before that, though.
You could do it in ports. You could do it in ports and IP addresses and things like that. Then you can have filters on that.
Yee.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah,
There's a
sort of.
different hierarchy. Because
Yeah.
ports just open to everybody. You don't even put like IP addresses for port or stuff like that.
Yes, you can. So if you have a proxy port, you can bind the local address, the local inbound, local outbound.
But then those are opened up to all domains.
Yes.
See what I'm saying? And you could say, here's an IP address, here's a port, I want it for this domain, I want it, you know what I'm saying? You can even go into like this type of hierarchy. I don't know. It's just ideas.
Well, the real problem, I mean, the problem is it's easy to design a config like that. It's harder to design a data structure that will execute efficiently at runtime. Well, yeah, I've gone through several review processes.
I'm not saying that this is not going to be a ginormous task. I'm saying if we have Miles and Alan and Stephen and maybe a few other people, and we have people who actually wants to drive this and come up with a plan, you come up with a goal, and we discuss it, and then we start coding, and we have like 25 people who start coding to this plan. You should be able to get this done.
The coding, I don't believe the coding is going to be the big block here. I think having good design takes a lot more time than actually.
So let's lock this working group away in the darkness of Illinois until they're done, right?
St. Croix always a lot warmer.
Well, then I want to be part of the working group.
But in the summer?
But Steve, Sue and I are coming down to the PLS working. Okay. We'd have them both on the boat. We go sail. We could isolate ourselves. We could be on our own island.
And then the yoga. She said she was okay with that.
Okay. We do.
I mean, I can totally see this being at least a 2-day endeavor to 3 days.
Why don't you want to bet?
It's going to be 5 to 7 days.
I think it's weeks.
No, but I mean the working group can sit in Champagne for weeks.
I understand. I think it's fine.
I think that the working group should at least be able to come up with something that looks like a reasonable proposal in a couple of days, 2-3 days. And then there'll be some bike shedding on the mailing list. But I think we have most of the players here who sort of really care are here and can agree to this, right? And hopefully they will also come to this working group session. I don't want to give up hope that easy. I mean, there has to be some way out of this. And I think with a strong driver who's willing to drive these efforts in Miles, I think this can actually happen. Now, he's always not going to write the code, but that's what we have Alan for. Like I said, I agree. I think
most of their effort here is actually getting everything designed. And then we have a lot of these components already. It's just refactoring and moving stuff around a little those things, right?
And I think we have to kind of agree that we're not going to be perfect.
Right.
I mean, we're going to have to get it as good as we can. It's going to be better than what we have now.
Right.
But it's never going to be perfect.
Design, and the design needs to be in a way that's part of the beauty of YAML, right? Adding new features further down hopefully won't be redoing the whole config structure. But the sort of general structure needs to be done in a way that we don't do mistakes. It will be mistakes, but hopefully marginal.
Yeah.
Not like the whole config file is going to change completely again.
I-
Because that's what it's going to be.
I think
Going from this YAML to the full retard YAML is essentially a whole rewrite of your entire.
The worst mistake I can see is coming up with a schema, getting it all implemented, and then when you convert your configuration, you can't do certain things.
Right, that's going to happen, right? And so people are either going to be stuck on 8, or we're going to have, I don't know, like, if we miss, like, let's say we forgot regex mapping, or we screwed up regex mapping. And we
Like it doesn't describe a certain
But here's-
feature
here's-
that exists.
works.
Because you can't do priorities, they want to know that I can make the defense before those, right? If you would never like the priorities.
But here's the good news though. If this working group comes out with a proposal, which includes the JSON schema, then people can start trying. What would my new remap.config look like with this new schema? And you can actually see if I can describe and it validates against that schema. And we don't have to write a single line of code for
I know, but you have like, okay, going through 30 to 40,000 remap rules.
Always will write like a little Perl script.
No, but I'm just saying that how would you even go through and validate that it'll even work for all 40,000 remap rules? I'm just thinking, how do you validate that? How do you?
Well, that you can express what you expect to express, right? And then it's not the implementation. And I remind you, in our case, what we would do is probably write something for Voluspa, or takes our Voluspa input and produces the YAML output.
But how do you know that's valid?
Yeah. Well, then you run it through the schema to make sure that it's correct.
No. It could be
Schema is
valid
correct,
schema. It could be valid schema. It could be translated correctly, but it's not the same behavior as what you had originally. Just saying, that's the fear.
It's obviously a possibility, but that
And you can't describe the current behavior.
I don't think the change. I mean, we implemented the same type of behavior in general. It's just that we reorganized how it's expressed.
Well, kind of, though, right? Because
I'm just saying, just watch out for those things. Those are the things to watch out for.
we're kind of meshing a bunch of things. I mean, the concept is mesh all these things together. That's almost by definition going to change something. I mean, actually, like middling, you're saying we want to say that this priority concept that was kind of wrong in remap's config. We need to dump that. So that's a change in behavior. It might be the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And most of us do these, at least we do, where you don't have one file with 25,000 lines in it. You have one file, we have 25,000 files with 10 lines in it, right?
But we do, yeah.
So we always sort of, we sort of kind of took this full retard approach a little bit. It's like, except we can't really.
Well, that's how do you do it in production? It has to be one remap file with 20
includes.
Yeah.
All of our stuff gets combined.
Right.
Enormous.
Well, if we don't think we can do this, then we all should.
No, I think we can. I'm just saying.
Where it is version number, honestly. I think it's totally doable. If you're, again, if I don't know what we say 9 is, like I seriously doubt we'll have a schema that everybody thinks is reasonable in, say, 2 months.
That's okay though. 2 months would be fine. It would be great. That gives us at least like 6 months to code this.
So you think, I guess when's 9 is?
But then that would mean you
Well,
branch.
we haven't decided, but one of the options was that we branch 9 in August timeframe for the release for December. But just because we branch doesn't mean that things can't get picked from master into that branch. So if we land the code in September or October, on master, we can still merge that into the 9 branches bucket. It's just that we have a more controlled environment, right? We know we're cherry picking just that one change since we branched.
Given the stuff we talked about, none of this is going to be just that one change.
But you're fine. Whatever, I mean, it doesn't matter, right? That's just Git management. It's super easy.
Cherry picking.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess I'm
And
so,
they implement hosting config. Well, that's going to change the cache logic, right? It's not going to. For real, I mean, that's going to actually
No, but I would imagine that in some sense, some of those data structures could still be reused for a lot of things.
Yeah, but I'm saying that you're not, it's going to tentacle out. What you're saying, you're going to start incorporating how to config, it's going to tentacle out even more than normal.
But you guys said that you thought the design was the big problem, not the coding.
Well, but this is all about branch. We said, well, we're just going to freeze 9 until this is
Well, in an ideal world, we get this in before we branch 9.
Yeah, all right.
But then we have from now till, say, August. What is that? That's like 3 to 4 months.
And cherry picking. He said, we're going to freeze not, we're just going to not do 9, and everyone's welcome to this, we're going to get it in. Then no, we wouldn't have done it. But I'm going to step up and say that I can handle the coding and the schema stuff and that. But you guys are going to actually have to come to the design.
So we need to have we need to get buy-in from everyone here, right? It's all hands on deck to get. And I think we do tomorrow, we come down with the minimum list.
Well,
Absolute minimum things we need to get in for 9.
On this subject, I'm going to agree with Miles. That's seriously. I'm just going to say whatever. I agree with Miles.
but I mean, I feel like it's,
At least the working group, sure.
who's running all your remap rules?
Properties, and then ops does some management of that.
So we get David Carlin to come to one of these meetings.
Yeah, here's another thing to think about, which comes up, I know it comes up for places like GoDaddy and others, is the ability to have, requiring the ability to have properties have remaps that can be easily incorporated into a larger remap, which is through that kit left, because the whole key manager project, can you even remember that at all?
Yep.
Okay, so he wrote Key Manager, and it's got this language in it that lets you do all the splits, feature extraction from URLs. What's the name of that?
I forget what it's called.
And I'll call it that.
Yeah.
EDL, that's language.
I think it is called EDL.
Okay. But
Something like that.
Do you see the similarity in that and what you guys are talking about?
Yeah.
Because it's all about the same thing. It's all about saying, I want to be able to split so when he says you have the end request, it does feature extraction to pull the important data out of that. And it uses that to percent true to decide what to do. When you get a leak, it says, okay, here's what you do. Right? And the feature extraction is generalized. You say, well, I want the half URL, or I want this header view, or whatever. Right? That's obviously secondary. And then you walk the tree and find where you want to do it. And that's very similar to what you want to do.
But not to the level where you want to generically specify what you do with headers and stuff, because then you go down. Is that full retard mode when you do that generically as well?
Well, I don't want to design it here now, but we need to make sure that it's achievable.
Exactly, that seems kind of,
But that's
not
what's getting at,
retard.
you actually we built it that way to achieve the fact that every property structure, only little subnet, you had like what it was saying, that could be easily incorporated into the main zone. So if you say your mail, and say, oh, do this feature extraction, make sure the path has mail on there. And then you mail can do anything you want, just make sure that you know, stuff it in there. And then it doesn't interfere with anybody else, because by the time you get to your tree, we know what's used. Right? And that might be interesting to look at. I think that'd be a desirable feature for a lot of people to have that sort of composability. If you're going to go there.
I mean, if we achieve this, it would be pretty damn awesome. We have to agree to that, all right? It's going to solve a lot of problems, better performance, better features.
Yeah, I'm not clear about the better one. Well, I think it's looking at the mixed bag. It's going to be more expensive actually, but it's going to be local savings.
What would be more expensive?
Because you're making more decisions.
But
Make it
you
already
make that top decision at the domain name.
Well,
That's where, because our regular version is
Format
really
this,
complicated.
but I only do once for 3 times.
I said, if we use extensively use parent config.
Right, that's the argument, and then
We have to match the whole
instead of
thing.
doing regex matches 3 or 4 times or whatever, we're going to do a 4 complex one, we're going to do it once.
I guess is the question is it going to be more expensive?
I think it's going to be less expensive.
What I will say is that it's going to depend a lot on the quality of our delivery.
I don't think we need to change those. I mean, finding the host is still going to be a hash, right?
Is that, well, isn't that one of the things we change though?
Host.
Regex, the priorities or not?
I mean, so the regex one is tricky, though, right? How do we want to do that one? Because
Right now, it's working.
right. So first we see if
First,
we see if we find one in the regular map host, one that you can just hash on the host, right? If you don't find one there, then you start doing the ordered one on the.
No, the way that we do it is if you find one, if there's any regular expressions above that, then you have to evaluate all the regular expressions above it. As I recall. That's how I thought that how we do it. If you go ahead, you find the map. If you find a map, and then if there's any regular expressions above that, the line numbers, then I think you have to execute those regular expressions to see if you match.
I thought if you had map y.com to Oracle and then later you said regex map dot whatever
This was a
y.com.
man that did this coding, so God knows what he did.
I think that's how it's done. Because I think you do regular expression line numbers in map, and you know exactly where. I don't know. We can check it, verify it. We're pretty sure that's the case. The way that the maps and the regular expression maps work is that you go ahead and you do a match on the map, and once you get that domain,
We need to redo every regex.
What if you don't
We need
have
to
one
re-
for the map, then you start at the bottom, then you do the entire map.
sure.
Okay, well, here we have it. This is the data structure you're talking about, right? So it starts up here, the URL rewrite mappings. It has a bunch of mappings inside of it. And those get iterated over when actually a request comes in. Each of those is a mapping store with a rule collection. Golly, I'm trying to remember how this is. This is weird. So yeah, so it comes in here, it does a SQDN match. I think this is where the tree is. Yeah, it comes down here.
There's a host mapping there, right there.
Yeah, see, so this is where the tree is, the global tri.
No, they're a little further down.
It could be,
Yeah, the tree is right there.
Right next to your left hand.
Oh, here. You come in, you do a hash on the host name, always do it, unless it's a regex, in which case you skip out.
Right.
But how do you know that? When do you know that is the question?
Right, I don't know what you can tell them in this data there.
I agree, but
Something happens up there in mapping store to the side.
Well, no, it happens up to our rewrite. It touches those mapping stores in some order. Right.
yeah, so the discussion question is, does it do both of those in parallel?
No.
Does it go down here
No,
and
it
go
goes-
back?
it goes down in parallel. Sorry, it goes
Goes
down.
down.
It goes down the map.
And then it goes.
If it finds something, then I think it does the line number, and then it knows that there's a regular expression above it, I think, and then it has to go through those.
So do you have a use case where you
I don't think so. I think it sticks to the, it goes to the mapping store and does a mapping, goes to one of the mapping stores, and matches in that mapping store or not. And then it goes to the next one.
Right, that's what I would have done. I would have assumed that if you find something here
Did it, Brian?
on the host name, down the way.
Yeah, you're done.
But that's what we
Host
get.
like this row.
That's what
I'm trying to think of a host like
What
this row.
use case do we have where you say over.com and start at over.com? Maybe we do, but you wouldn't expect just to request to over.com to go to over.com. We wouldn't want to express that to the.
Oh, I remember what it does. No, Brian's right. It actually does both. It looks at the line numbers to see which one is higher priority.
Yeah.
Right.
I know, that's why regular expression is so expensive for us. And it makes a difference
But
on
is
how,
that-
the
is
order
that-
of the regular expressions you put too.
Is that a reasonable use case that you would have a map post and a regex map matching the same?
So what we were doing is we were doing something like this, like HTTP, period, I don't know, star, and then we said save icon.
whatever it is, I forget what they were. And then, that was one of them, and then, huh?
I see, so you want to have part of the tab.
And then you say HTTP, and then there was like mail. This is our case. Way down here, mail dot, well, even actually some of the regular expressions were down here, even on mail, Yahoo, .com. And then this is a map, and this is a regex map. So you have to go ahead and say, okay, you matched here. Did I actually fully match
Because
this?
you don't want to list the rules for mail.yahoo.com /fab icon load, whatever.
Yeah.
So that actually works today? Like if Dave icon would go to origin over flu and mail icon, the mail origin would be
No, well, you can see you just mapped all same icons to some.
origin equals to,
Yeah.
and then mail goes to origin mail. So if you put out the second thing,
Yeah.
So this is, I mean, I wouldn't have expressed it like this in the, if I did the full retard config from scratch, I would say host
Yeah, you would-
mail.yahoo.com
Yeah, you.
slash fab icon and then the fab icon domain name or the server and then put other things, right? And then you do duplicate those lines for the fab icon, but that's okay. I mean, I can see that this is such an optimized, I mean, you guys are being lazy.
Yeah. I know. And it's very expensive.
Right, you're being lazy managing your remap rules at the expense of being expensive.
Yeah, we let CPU, like 5% of our CPU.
But you see, in our case, we would use this in Velocify, we would say, this domain should get the fab icon rule, and then that gets generated automatically. And then it's explicit. Every remap rule has all the rules that applies for mail.yahoo.com in one place. None of this sort of hopping around.
And then you have problems with, you have to make sure that some certain ones don't conflict with others.
Right, and ordering and all sorts of kind of nightmarish
Yeah,
things.
I know, we have actually script tested that.
Right.
That's right.
But it seems like the duplication, which would have no impact on people, actually would make your performance better, but duplicating the fab icon rule, it seems like a marginal cost. Especially when we get this sort of nice notion of here's the host, and here's a bunch of paths, and it's all structured together in a nice way. And you can look at that one host and know exactly how mail.yahoo.com is going to operate without seeing, like, trying to find all possible places that possibly
But that sort of goes against to what Alan was saying, that he wanted it concise and not repeat and cut and paste and all that stuff, right?
Well, but I'm here, and I think about normal ops as infernal.
Yeah.
Because I think you need to think of this as, imagine that mail managed their little world all by themselves.
This is what I talked about the ad call thing, right? That's the whole point of it.
Right, but now there's this thing where there's a global rule for everyone that goes to fab icon. So when mail goes to look at their little world config, they don't see shit. You don't have a fab icon URL.
Yeah, and how the hell
And
does
it
that
doesn't-
have
because it
go
gets-
somewhere else? I don't even see, I don't even understand why that happens.
Right? And yes, there's a bit of duplication, but now you've encapsulated all of the behavior from mail.yahoo.com in that one little universe, and they don't give a shit about what anyone else does outside of their little universe.
Well, that's composability, right?
Yeah, it's easier to look at the configuration and understand what it's doing.
Right. And that's sort of the same concept I had with the filters and acros. I mean, yeah, I might go try to find all these filters spread out in all sorts of places in the file and try to puzzle together what the behavior is going to be for mail.yahoo.com. But if it's explicitly there in that rule for mail.yahoo.com, I see exactly what acros is going to apply to which parts of the URLs. And it's right there. None of this chasing around other areas and other locations. And yes, you're right. It's a lot of duplication, but that's generally how most of these configs. I mean, look at Envoy. Envoy's configs to do something like our map / to a domain. That's like 50 lines of YAML in their configs. I'm not saying that we should aim to make a 50-line YAML for something simple, but I don't think it's.
But then they have things that you can do is you can define a cluster and you can define how you want to do,
Right.
handle that cluster. And things like that. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a little bit more complexity that they can actually do.
Right, but we get it there too, right? So, because their concept of clusters and whatnot might be sort of moving the parent stuff in there. Would your ops people be okay with getting rid of those sort of global thingies and move them into your
I would think.
host-based thing?
I would think so if we say that's how you have to do it. Because what are you going to do? Go to another server that does the same damn thing? Okay.
How does traffic control work? It works similar to our Ballistic?
Similar.
So you get like one generated remap file for each service?
No, it's all in one file, but you sort of, the way we manage them is very much like Ballistic, but then it generates one big file.
Right.
And I think the way we think about it is very Ballistic-like.
Right. So it's the same concept, right? You would be explicit about saying that mail.yahoo.com has a /pad icon, and it goes to the, even though it's the same rule for all services, you'll still be explicit about it.
All right, so let me see if I do this right.
So is it correct or is there?
Maybe I'm doing it wrong.
And our entire remap file is a single line, it's a single registration.
And that's okay. I mean, if that's what
We
we
do,
do,
whatever comes in, we just pass right on through to the
none of this will affect you in any way or shape. So you would have essentially one rule that has a regex in it, and you get the same behavior.
So I did regex map, HTTP dot star to crazy, to HTTP bin org status 2 and 4. Yeah. And map is the regular one to status 200. So that way I can tell, like at 200, I know I match this guy.
But you're not org versus .com.
Thank you. Better?
Yeah. This is a production server. What?
Your apartment, right? Okay, so then
We are crazy.
So which one won the regex?
the regex. Regex one. So now below.
Yeah. We don't drive the average problem person. Or manager.
So it's below.
Yeah. Ordering matters.
We knew the ordering matters, but it's weird to me.
So it's first match, period.
That's
Except that the regex wins over map.
Yeah, it's the first match on the lines, but really the way that it matches is not the first match. The way that it does programmatically is that it matches all the maps first. See what I'm saying? Then it sees if there's any regular expressions that are above that and has to evaluate those. So programmatically, it's different, but yes, in the text file, it's first match.
No, not even that's correct.
What?
There's difference between things proposed and things proposed too. I went through this, and I have to the current master doc has a more accurate description of what's going on. So it matters whether the rules have posting around.
Don't all,
The whole map, well, I guess you
No,
except for the slash.
What?
Except for the slash.
You do map slash, I guess.
These one map doc.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. Okay. Those are, yeah, I all agree, those are probably special.
There's
Those-
security mag. Anyway, I actually don't remember when I went through when I had this problem because we had a customer problem with this.
Mhm.
And I looked through the code and I updated the document master to accurately describe what's going on. So if you want to look, it's there on master.
Those might be evaluated at the end.
No,
All-
it
aren't
actually
they?
is two passes. There's one pass with either with the host or without. And then if that doesn't work, then there's another pass with the other way. I don't, yeah, I wrote this down so I wouldn't have to remember.
And there's nothing stopping us from retaining this behavior.
That's
Learn
why
something new.
I always thought it was.
Well, that's why it's
Straight math.
so expensive for mail, because we would do the stupid fave icon and stuff like that, and we'd always evaluate all these regular expressions, even though mail, which is our biggest property, was way at the end. It's like order matters on performance.
And they can't get away with it, even if mail wanted to be, I'm going to put in mail.yahoo.com/fab icon.
Yeah,
Explicitly, they still have to suffer through the fucking regular.
But I think even if you have something like this, even if you have HTTP, period star,